Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. And today we're going to be doing updated presidential election prediction between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, who are now both of their parties' respective presumptive nominees. Before I start, I'd like to say if you like my content, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you know when we upload, and also leave a like and comment. And with that said, let's get into it. So like always, I'm going to start with the solid states for Joe Biden. Those are going to be Washington, Oregon, California, Hawaii, New Mexico, Colorado, Illinois, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, and Washington, D.C. And I'm also going to add Maine's 1st Congressional District onto that. As for the safe states for Donald Trump, we have Montana, Idaho, Utah, Wyoming, North and South Dakota, Nebraska at large and its 1st and 3rd congressional districts, Kansas, Oklahoma, Iowa, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, Indiana, and Ohio. So to start off, we have Joe Biden at 202 electoral votes and Donald Trump at 145. So now I'm going to get into the likely states and districts for each candidate, starting with Joe Biden. And I'm going to start with Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District. Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District contains Omaha and a lot of its suburbs, and the suburbs are really Donald Trump's biggest obstacle to winning the 2024 election. In 2020, suburbs across the country shifted towards Joe Biden and against Donald Trump, and Omaha was no different. This district went from Trump winning it by 2 points to Biden winning it by over 6 points, but in 2022, it was redistricted to be more favorable to Republicans. So even though I do think the suburbs are going to shift against Trump again in 2024, taking into account national polls that have Trump up and taking into account the redistricting, I think this district will probably be pretty stagnant from 2020, so that's why I'm calling it likely Democrat. Next up is going to be the state of Virginia. Virginia is kind of a similar story to Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District because most of Virginia's politics are decided by northern Virginia cities and their suburbs. As a result of this, there was a pretty sizable swing against Trump in Virginia in 2020. He went from losing it by 5 points to losing it by around 10 points. But of course, in 2021, Glenn Youngkin was elected governor, and in 2022, in the midterms, despite the environment, Democrats only won the popular vote in Virginia by a couple points, so Virginia can still be competitive in the right circumstances. Overall, I think Democrats have kind of hit a plateau in Virginia for how well they're going to do, and because of how poor Joe Biden's favorability is right now, and because Donald Trump is leading in the popular vote polls, I do think Virginia will probably get a little bit closer, probably vote for Biden by around 8 points, so I am calling it likely Democrat. As for the likely states for Donald Trump, I'm going to start with the state of Alaska. Alaska is a state that's very reliably Republican until recently when it's been trending towards Democrats. Every year since 2008, Alaska has gotten closer, and in 2022, it actually elected Democrat Mary Peltola to Congress. Despite the national trends showing Joe Biden down, I do still think Alaska is going to trend towards him, so I am calling Alaska likely Trump. Next is going to be the state of Texas. Texas is another state that's been trending towards Democrats for a while. In 2016, Trump only won it by 9 after Romney had won it by 16 in 2012, and then in 2020, Trump only won it by 6. And just like the rest of the country, the suburbs in Texas shifted strongly against Trump. But an interesting part about Texas's results in 2020 was that the Rio Grande Valley, which is very heavily Hispanic, trended heavily towards Trump. And a lot of people wondered if this was maybe a one-time thing, but then in 2022, in the statewide races, those results held up. And in the Texas primary just last week, in the Democratic primary, Joe Biden had really bad numbers in the Rio Grande Valley, while Trump did really well, really all throughout the state. And Trump did well even in the suburbs where he struggled in 2020. So overall, with all of this in mind, I do think Texas is probably going to rebound towards the GOP in 2024. I think Trump's probably going to win it by 7 to 8 points, so I'm calling it likely Republican. Next up is going to be the state of Florida. Of course, everybody knows the story here now in Florida. Donald Trump won Florida by a bigger margin in 2020 than he did in 2016, despite the rest of the country turning against him. And of course, in 2022, Republicans did very well in the state. Ron DeSantis won his governor race by almost 20 points, and Marco Rubio won by double digits as well. Overall, Florida is zooming to the right, and I honestly think you can make the argument for solid Republican here, but I don't think Trump's going to break double digits, so I am calling it likely Republican. Finally, we have Maine's 2nd Congressional District. This is a district that has been trending more and more towards Donald Trump. This is a district that used to be pretty reliably Democratic, but in recent years it's become a lot more favorable to Republicans. It voted for Obama in 2012 and then flipped to Trump by double digits in 2020, or in 2016, I mean, and then in 2020 it shifted a couple points against Trump. Overall, I think Maine is going to trend against Donald Trump and towards Joe Biden in 2024, but I think that's mostly going to come from Maine's first congressional district, so I think Maine's second is probably going to hold up for Trump, so I am calling it likely Republican. So now, with all of the likely and solid states out of the way, we have Joe Biden at 216 electoral votes and Donald Trump at 219 electoral votes. So starting pretty close here. And we're going to go through all of the toss-up states now, going from west to east, starting with the state of Nevada. Nevada is a state that has been trending pretty consistently right since 2008. It's trended towards Republicans every year since then. Even in 2020, when the nation swung over 2 points against Trump, Nevada stayed consistent and actually very slightly swung towards Trump. In 2022, Republicans were supposed to flip the governorship and Senate race here, and they did flip the governorship, but Adam Laxalt, the Republican nominee, underperformed polling and lost by less than 1 point in this race, and Catherine Cortez Masto was reelected. The reason Republicans were able to flip the governor race is because the Republican nominee, Joe Lombardo, was from Clark County. He was the sheriff there, and that's the biggest population center in Nevada. That's where Las Vegas is. And he didn't win the county, but he was able to shave the margin down low enough that he was able to win by winning big in the rest of the state and only losing slightly in Clark County. The way that Clark County and the state of Nevada as a whole have been trending bodes very well for Republicans in the state, and so does Joe Biden's approval. Overall, I do think Trump will narrowly flip the state of Nevada, so I am calling Nevada tilt Trump. Next up, we have the state of Arizona, which is really the opposite story of Nevada. It's been trending towards Democrats pretty consistently since 2008. In 2012, Romney won the state by 9 points, but then in 2016, Donald Trump only won the state by 3 points, and then in 2020, it finally flipped to Joe Biden by a fraction of a percent. The Democrats also flipped both of Arizona's Senate seats in 2018 and 2020, and the governorship flipped to Democrats in 2022. The major reason for this is because of the suburbs, especially Phoenix's suburbs. In 2020, Maricopa County, the home of Phoenix, flipped for the first time, I think, since Harry Truman won it. And Donald Trump himself is also a uniquely bad candidate in Arizona because back when John McCain was alive, he had a lot of beef with Trump. And since McCain's death in 2018, Trump and his supporters have been less than kind to McCain's supporters. And that certainly is not helping the trends in the state for Donald Trump. State polling does have Donald Trump leading Joe Biden in Arizona by a couple points, but because of everything I've mentioned so far, I really just don't think that's going to happen. I think it will be close, probably similar to 2020, but overall, I think that Joe Biden's going to win it narrowly again. The thing that could doom Joe Biden here is the fact that his approvals are pretty much the lowest for any post-war president at this point in their presidency. And if Donald Trump really does win the popular vote, it's hard to see Arizona voting to the left of the popular vote. But anything can happen, and trends in Arizona are just so bad for Republicans that I do think Biden will hang on. Next is going to be the state of Minnesota. So in 2016, Minnesota was very close. Hillary Clinton won it by less than 2 points, but that was largely because there was a lot of third-party vote in 2016. But because it was so close, a lot of people considered it to be a swing state in 2020. But Joe Biden ultimately ended up winning it by over 7 points. Now, there has been some polling recently showing that Minnesota might be pretty close. Donald Trump is within striking distance of Joe Biden in a lot of these polls. And a lot of that probably has to do with the fact that Trump is leading nationwide right now and that Joe Biden is so unpopular, as I've mentioned already in this video. But another reason for this is probably because there is a lot of third-party candidates running this time. Most notably, you have RFK Jr. running. You have Cornel West running. Also, Green Party is probably going to run a candidate as well. And all of these candidates will probably hurt Joe Biden nationwide, and especially in a state like Minnesota where higher third-party share hurts Democrats. Ultimately, I do think Joe Biden is going to carry Minnesota again, but I think it's going to be closer than it was in 2020, so I am calling Minnesota lean Biden. Next up is going to be the state of Wisconsin. Now, Wisconsin is a state that has been experiencing one of the biggest coalition shifts in the country if you look at their past election results to their current election results. It used to be that the rural areas of the state were a lot bluer, or at least a lot more competitive, while the suburban areas, especially the WOW counties, were very Republican. Now, the suburban counties are trending towards Democrats. They're still Republican, but they're trending very heavily towards Democrats. Meanwhile, the rest of the state in the rural areas has become ruby red. And this has resulted in Wisconsin becoming one of the most important swing states. In 2008 and 2012, Barack Obama won the state by respectable margins both times. Then in 2016, Hillary Clinton narrowly lost it to Donald Trump. And then in 2020, Joe Biden flipped it back by an even more narrow margin than when Trump won it 4 years prior. Because of how unpopular Biden is and because of Trump's general strength in the Rust Belt, I do think Trump is probably going to flip Wisconsin, so I'm going to call it lean Trump. Next up is the state of Michigan. Michigan's kind of a similar story to Wisconsin. Barack Obama won it by very large margins in 2008 and 2012. Then in 2016, Donald Trump flipped it narrowly, and Joe Biden flipped it back in 2020. For the last couple months, Donald Trump has had a pretty consistent polling lead in Michigan. He's been leading by up to 5 points, sometimes more, sometimes less. And I don't actually think Trump's going to win by that big of a margin in Michigan, but I do think that should be a pretty big warning sign for Biden in the entire Rust Belt if he's losing Michigan at all. It is also worth noting that Michigan has a relatively high Muslim population, and if they're not happy with how Joe Biden is dealing with the Israel-Palestine conflict, they might sit out or vote third party or even vote for Donald Trump in some cases. Now, I don't think that has as great of an effect as a lot of people online seem to think it does, but I do think it has a small effect in Michigan. Overall, I do think Trump is narrowly going to flip Michigan, so I am calling it tilt Trump. Next up is going to be the state of Georgia. Georgia was kind of a surprise flip for Biden in 2020. He won it very narrowly, and polls were expecting him to win it, but polls pretty broadly overestimated him, so it was kind of a surprise when he actually ended up winning Georgia. In the same election, both of Georgia's Senate seats flipped to the Democrats from the Republicans, and in 2022, Raphael Warnock was reelected to a full term. However, other than that, Republicans broadly are doing pretty well in Georgia. Brian Kemp was reelected by a big margin, and all of the other statewide races in Georgia went Republican in the midterms. It seems like Georgia is mostly reverting back to Republicans. It's probably not going to be as strongly Republican as it used to be, but I do think Donald Trump's going to flip it, especially because it seems like 2024 is going to be kind of a lower turnout election, especially lower than 2020 in my opinion. This is mostly because it seems like everyone kind of dislikes both of our main candidates here. And so if lower turnout happens in Atlanta, especially among minorities, I think that's going to sink Joe Biden's chances in the state. So I do think Trump's going to flip it. So I'm calling it lean Trump. Next up is the state of North Carolina. North Carolina is a state that's pretty reliably Republican on the federal level. In 2016, Donald Trump won it by about 3 points, and in 2020, he held on to it by a thinner margin, about 1.5 points. And in 2022, the Senate race was also about a 3-point margin. Trends in the state really aren't that great for Republicans, especially in the tech triangle, which is trending towards Democrats. But it seems like Republicans are holding up here pretty well. And in an election where the incumbent president is a very unpopular Democrat, I do think North Carolina will be a pretty decent state for Trump. I think he's going to win it by a similar margin to 2016, so I'm going to call it lean Trump. Finally, we have the state of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, similarly to Wisconsin and Michigan, was won by Obama in 2008 and 2012, then flipped to Donald Trump in 2016, and then was flipped back in 2020. Polling here actually hasn't been especially great for Donald Trump. He's really been about even with Joe Biden, which isn't bad, but it's not great compared to the polls that we're seeing nationally and the polls that we're seeing in places like Michigan and Georgia. However, polling has always underestimated Donald Trump in the state of Pennsylvania. In 2022, it actually overestimated Republicans, but Trump wasn't on the ballot. I think it's more likely that polling underestimates Trump in Pennsylvania again, especially with the trends you're seeing in places like Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota. It's hard to see Pennsylvania trending away from Trump, and especially when you look at the big picture in the whole nation. If Trump's winning the popular vote, he's definitely not going to lose Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is going to be close, but I do think Trump is narrowly going to win it, so I am going to call Pennsylvania tilt Trump. And with that, we have the whole map filled out. Donald Trump is going to be re-elected president. He's going to be elected the 47th president, winning 301 electoral votes to Joe Biden's 237. Overall, Trump flips Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, and everything else remains the same. I mostly think Trump is going to win because polling right now is really good for him, and Joe Biden's popularity is really low. At the end of the day, I don't actually think Donald Trump's going to win the popular vote, but I think it's going to be a lot closer than 2020 was. I think it might even be closer than 2016. And that trend would definitely be enough for Trump to flip all of the states that I mentioned, and even Arizona. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching the video. If you like my content, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you know when we upload. Also, leave a like and comment. Tell me what you like, what you disagree with, what you agree with, what I can do to improve the channel. And thank you guys so much for watching, and have a great day.